welcome to Cybersalon, our last episode from the series Horizon Scanning. We are a think tank that focuses mainly on digital rights and improving of digital futures for us all. And today is quite important event, is finishing a very long research program lasting the whole year, where we addressed 3 topics, and today is the 4th. So we looked at health, communities, high street, and today future of money, which for many will be the central point because money runs the world. So we've been around for quite a while. Cybersalon has been founded in 1997. And we predicted everything will happen within the next 5 years, and everything took 20 years. So we just sometimes have to adjust our pace. So today we're trying to pace ourselves and looking at money in near future. So welcome to the event. Thank you very much to Patchworks, the leading UK integrator, for sponsorship, and to lovely guests and writers who contributed today. So with that, if I can hand over to Ben, he will pick up from there.
Thank you, Eva. So here we are. This is the 4th, as we were saying, 4th event in the Tales from the Cybersalon series. I'd just like to say a word about the series and what it is, how it's been working. The tales of the title are 4 commissioned or requested short stories on the subject of the night. And gathered on the panel screen in front of you are our 4 authors and our expert panel of 3 plus me. So those of you who can do math really quick have noticed that one person must be 2 things. That's actually Eva tonight. She's one of our writers. Stephen's one of our writers. Paul's one of our writers, and so is Sophie. And these 4 writers responded to our open call about nearly 2 months, just over 2 months ago, I would think now, on the subject of what would it be like once the UK has a digital pound, a central digital currency, something much in discussion, though we may not be sure which form it could be taking. In response to that, Stephen and I went through all of the submissions, formed the shortlist, and took from that shortlist the 4 writers you see here and put them with the panel about 2-3 weeks ago. We have a private conversation there where we explore some of the issues raised, try to dig into the interests of the writers and pull out some of the world building to strengthen the story and to engage the discussion further. And then we bring the results of that process to you tonight. On cybersalon.org's website, if you search for, or you click on the link in the writing for Tales from the Cybersalon, you'll find all 4 stories. We'll read them tonight, as well as gather feedback from the panel about them, and then invite a panel discussion and an open discussion from the audience. So I'd like now to introduce our expert panel for the Any Spare Change for Change Future of Money event, and they are Currion Leon. Hello, Currion. Oh, you're on mute. There we go.
I'm an independent theatre creator that's gone through a whole journey of physical, digital and virtual arts. And I'm currently funded by the Arts Council to look at NFT in the future funding and residuals of art. So I think Eva and yourself invited me along because I have kind of a curiosity of how all this works from a non-tech perspective.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much, Currion. And I'd also like to introduce Jana Hlistova, who's the host of, amongst many other things, the Purse podcast and other financial matters. Jana, good evening.
Good evening, Ben. Thank you for that. And you did really well in pronouncing my name there, Jana Hlistova. Very good. Yes, so I host the Purse podcast, which is all about changing the conversation for women about money and investing. The Purse is a financial media company aimed at women. And during the day, I very much spend my time working in technology, very much on the commercial side, however, and it's great to be here this evening.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And also joining them is David Birch, who those of you who've been on other Cybersalon events may have met David, or seen him before, but hello David, brief bio, much of it speaks for itself, but...
Well, thanks very much. So I'm an author, advisor and commentator on digital financial services. I've written a couple of books. including one about the future of money, actually. And I also belonged to a writers' circle and a prose group because I thought it would be kind of cool to write a novel, which I failed at. So I know how hard it is. So I have nothing but admiration for people that can write an actual story, as opposed to, something about central bank digital currencies or tokens or whatever else it was I was writing about today.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. You do yourself a disservice by that description, but wonderful to have you. As a moment to set scene for the night, throughout the evening, we will ask a series of polls. I do have an opening poll just to find out where our baseline is before Jana gives us a little bit of a background on some materials. And here we are. You should see an opening poll question on the screen. Again, just set a baseline before we change everything in the course of the next hour and a half. What method do you currently use most often for money? Is it barter and payment in kind? Are you carrying around rare commodities like gold, silver and diamonds? Cash? Direct bank transfer? I know that a lot of people using that when they're sending payments and balances after going out for dinner. Debit cards and credit cards? Bitcoin, Litecoin, or some other digital coin, smart contracts, or some other kind of smart coin, or something we haven't even noticed yet. And yes, it looks like, actually, I'm quite surprised to see that much cash in the mix, I'll be honest with you. I was expecting it to be a straightaway run-win for debit cards and direct bank payments. But so far, not a lot of everyday coin use. We'll see how that changes.
29%? I don't believe that for a moment. What is it? It's a strange preponderance of drug dealers on the... I don't believe that. These people are I can't believe this. These people are making it up just to wind us up.
They're making it up to wind us up. Well, okay. Well,
I use cash whenever I can.
I like to save on the paperwork as well, Stephen, but unfortunately, a lot of my clients don't share my enthusiasm.
Here we go. Cash is big in Germany. Thank you, Eva. Very good to know. Right. So without further ado, let's sort of jump into the meat and potatoes of the evening. Jana, I think you've prepared a little bit of a scene setter for us before we move on. So.
I have. Okay, thank you. So the existing economic and financial system arguably is broken. Monetary and fiscal policy has led to rising inflation and a fall in real wages. And central banks continue to print money, otherwise referred to as quantitative easing or QE. We've seen this play out after the financial crisis of 2008, and now as a result of the pandemic, when economies around the world were shut down. Central banks have been printing money to protect the financial system and our economy from complete collapse. So what's the problem? Global currency is being devalued. Just think, how much more expensive is it to buy property today than it was, say, 10 years ago, and even a year ago? It's no coincidence that Satoshi Nakamoto published his white paper describing a digital cryptocurrency titled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system in 2008, after people lost trust in the government and financial institutions around the world. Bitcoin is a decentralized and permissionless blockchain technology, a global monetary network, and digital currency which cannot be controlled by any one party, government, or central bank. Simply put, no single entity controls or operates Bitcoin. Do you think central banks like Bitcoin? Not really. And unlike fiat money, Bitcoin has a limited supply of 21 million coins. It's impossible for more Bitcoin to be printed. Therefore, unlike fiat money, Bitcoin is deflationary, not inflationary. With a fixed supply, as the demand for the asset goes up, so does the price. The only asset that is offsetting money printing is Bitcoin. In fact, it's outperformed it since 2008. Bitcoin is now regarded as digital gold and a store of value, and increasingly as sound money. Years after people realized that the underlying technology of Bitcoin, the blockchain, could be used for other purposes. Ethereum, powered by its digital currency Ether or ETH, proposed to use blockchain tech to create the platform powering decentralized applications and transactions that contain executable code, otherwise known as smart contracts. This code would be used to tamper-proof decentralized financial contracts and other applications. Unlike Bitcoin, Ether doesn't want to establish itself as an alternative monetary system. Instead, it facilitates and monetizes the operation of the Ethereum network, smart contracts, and decentralized applications. Applications include NFTs, non-fungible tokens, DAOs, and DeFi, decentralized finance. So what is DeFi? It is a lending and borrowing system distributed on the blockchain. It is open, decentralized, permissionless, and immutable. You no longer need to go to your bank. You can use DeFi. It's a new financial system that is literally being built before our very eyes. So it's out with the old and in with the new. However, the government is taking notice and they want a piece of the action. It's why they want to issue central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Whilst they're likely to build CBDCs on Ethereum, there is a major difference. CBDC is issued and regulated by the country's financial authority. Therefore, it is centralized, permissioned, and closed. It goes without saying there are significant privacy concerns and significant privacy implications. The question then is, how much more control will the government have over our lives if we use CBDCs? And how might this change how we live, how we work, and who we become?
Thank you, Jana. Now, there's a good starter for us, I think. Lots to pick out of that. And I think, Stephen, you may well agree with me on this one, but of all of the topics we've broached in this series, this was probably one of the more challenging ones to bite into. So it does help to have a little bit of scene set there. Stephen, now's a good time to introduce you. I think we're going to start getting into the actual stories. I know there's a good point to bring you on and sort of, introduce each one in turn. I'll go and grab the links and share them in the chat as we do. But as I said, Stephen and I, we've been co-editors for this series, had to pick through the shortlist to find these and then help work and guide these stories. Hopefully it's been successful again. Stephen.
Hello, everyone. So, yeah, as Ben says, we've been doing this for the four. I'd agree with you. I think this is quite a difficult topic to get your head into, certainly coming as a sort of layperson to it. But I have to say, it's the one that I found the most fascinating and I think has probably had more of a knock-on effect to other stuff that I'm doing. So I guess that comes along with it being sort of difficult at the same time. Yeah, me and Ben have looked through the stories that are submitted, and Ben gives me quite a hard time about the ones that I submit, just so everyone knows. And the quality has been so good that it's really sort of made me make sure that I'm doing the best that I possibly can to get in as well. So, but I think there's really probably just one thing to say, which I say at all of these as I introduce the stories. Pay attention, I think, is the key message there. So I won't say any more on all that, but what I will do is introduce Eva Pascoe, who obviously you've all heard already, but Eva's going to read her story, and she's first, and it's called The Summoned. So over to you, Eva.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, so I start now. The Summoned. The bell at Gazdak rang loudly as young CEO Rico Nada raised his hands and clapped at the Smoothcat software team. Thanks to these guys, we have accomplished the impossible. I couldn't ask for a better crew to share my journey, hollered Rico at the top of his voice as the ticker tape showed Smoothcat shares going well above the launch price. Carmen, his mom, was speaking from behind his team. She was relieved that Rico's audacious IPO with only small revenues have reached 22 alphas per share, valuing the company at 13 billion. Smooth cat code was a breakthrough, lifting Alphaverse gaming for everyone to a new comfort level, with no dropped frames or incorrect GPU frame pacing, making virtual worlds possible for all, not just for the hardcore gamers. It was a long journey for Rico Nada. Gazdak, Gamers Association of Security Dealers and Quotations, was a closed shop. Only the summoned have been allowed to tap the market for innovation funds. Known as the tall men, the summoned had a monopoly on access to Alpha's money. Outliers like Rico were not invited. Born on the wrong side of the tracks, Rico was the son of a single mom, a cleaner, at Ivy Academy, where the tall men sent their sons. The story was that they came from the east on their big boats many centuries ago. They brought their own currency called alphas and quickly monopolized business funding. They never failed, their deals always worked out, and fortunes were made due to special capability that tall men brought with them from the east, with the enhanced money-making gift which they absorbed from an ivy plant. It was a type of ivy that surrounded them at the academy for 4 years. It spread a type of virus, if absorbed for 4 years, ensured a high level of viral load and gave tall men an instinct to de-risk financial decisions to zero. With time, they became the sole handlers of new funding and banking. Their wealth grew rapidly as they concentrated their alpha currency and became owners of all real estate. Then, the summoned extracted fees from the people for access to anything from housing to transport, even digital worlds like the game platform Alphaverse. Tall Street Journal, where tall men's wives worked, praised the wins, reinforcing the idea of tall men magic financial powers. It was a perfect setup that worked for centuries, and the rich grew richer. The rest of the people fell into poverty, unable to save to acquire assets, to borrow money, and only were allowed small tokens for Alphaverse for a few hours of gameplay. Tall men liked to keep the population occupied. Against all odds, Rico found a way in. Homeschooled by Carmen, he developed his love of making games and coding late into the night, surrounded by a scent of ivy. His bedroom was decorated with ivy leaves that Carmen would steal from the academy, smuggling out a few fresh branches at a time. With the ivy, Carmen made sure that her only son had the same chances with Alpha's money gift as the tall men's sons. When Rico Nada was 7, Carmen told him his father was a student at the Ivy Academy. He was tall and good looking, that's all I can tell you. That's why you are tall. You are in part a tall man. Rico grew with the conviction that he too could succeed. He pushed through to get funds for his game tech, something that nobody beyond the summoned could even dream about. His buddies chipped in from the gig jobs income to fund his ideas for Smooth Cat. The team was camping in Carmen's tiny apartment behind the academy, where Rick's code was developed on funding from players, independent of the big backers. Rico realized he could turn the tables on the tall man. Smooth Cat made any metaverse smooth, taking the power away from Alphaverse owners. Any wins in any universe were quickly accumulated in cat coins and transferable between the games. Players could leverage assets in one game to borrow for a new homestead in another. Their assets grew quickly. Cat coins were so convenient for gamers that they became a widely used currency. New game startups could use the earned cat coins from one game as a collateral for their own meta world. And after 12 months, Rico got to raise his hands in triumph at the Gazdak podium. Descending the podium behind him, Carmen's happy expression began to change. She opened her handbag, taking out a photograph. Take a look at this. She handed it over to Rico. The photo showed a young, very tall man standing next to a waterfall in the lush mountains. There was something familiar about his smile. It's your father, said Carmen quietly. Rico looked at her surprised. I thought he was one of the tall man's students. Rico Nada, your dad was not one of those summoned fakes here, she said dismissively. Your father was the real summoned, my childhood sweetheart from back home, from the tallest tribe in the south, Quinamo, meaning the summoned. He played basketball for the village team, but he was gunned down, defending his younger brother from drug dealers. I escaped up north, getting a janitor job at the Ivy Academy. Rico asked, why are you telling me this now? I wanted you to know that you did all by yourself, that you succeeded without being one of them. Was it the ivy in my room? Isn't that why the tall men are so money-savvy? Asked Rico. It's just a ruse to persuade others about the mysteries surrounding the tall men, a trick they play on us to justify the stratospheric high salaries, banking fees, exclusive control over alphas. I found the paper from the last century under the bed of the Ivy Academy dean. It described the Ivy story origins, the creation of super credentials to make them look infallible. The truth is, it's just a fable. I put the Ivy in your room so you felt confident too. The finance companies on Toll Street only recruit for risk capital and banks from the Ivy Academy. So nobody ever found out that outsiders can be good with money too. The truth is that your coding skills didn't get any better just because you sniffed your Ivy for 4 years, she giggled. Rico raised his eyes and saw the giant Gazdak ticker tape running his stock ticker. It was still going up. He smiled. He liked the idea of being a Quinamo, the Anshet tribe, famous for tall men, top traders before the fake Samont arrived in the big boats. Quinamo owned property as a collective. We will share this with others, Rico decided. Catcoins will be a DAO-owned venture. Everyone will participate in their success and grow our capital. Your destiny was to break the tall man monopoly on alphas. Carmen looked at him with pride. You and your gaming crew are the real Samont. Bring on the Catcoin revolution.
Excellent, thank you, Eva. I was going to say, if we were in a big hall together, you'd be getting lots of lots of applause at this point. It's fantastic. So much in there.
That's for David. I'm doubling down on revolution.
Excellent. Brilliant. So that was the summoned. Our next story is from Sophie, and this one's called the Accountant. So without any further introduction, Sophie, over to you.
Hey up, you all right? Just get me writing up. Okay, the Accountant. Tell me again what you want, I said, cracking my fingers. Dennis squirmed in his seat, twisting his hat in his hands. I need the sex credits bringing down, he said, and the alcohol ones. One lamp lit the dark room. I had positioned it in his direction to keep myself in shadow. In the cone of light, I could see the beads of sweat on his face. What's your code? I asked. 554786, he replied. I typed the numbers onto my screen and almost spat my coffee. 200 sex credits this month. Dennis hung his head and I felt the pit of my stomach drop. Sometimes it was hard to tell who you were dealing with. Who cared as long as they paid? I took out a few magazine subscriptions, he shrugged. Visits to Coco's. It's been a month since the wife left. I don't care. I stopped him. I looked at his health credits, which were considerably lower. I transferred 50 over, moved another 50 to home credits and transportation. He sat there in silence as I went through the bank statement, added a few weekend trips, a fake gym membership, art classes. Finally, I sat back and sipped at my coffee. That should do you, I said. Really? He beamed. Really, I replied. When's the job interview? Next week. Consider your credit test passed. Dennis stood up. Oh, thank you. He held out his hand. I didn't take it. You can go now, I gestured to the door. I always waited 15 minutes after every client left. I tapped my watch, waited until the hand struck 1 before putting on my trench coat and stepping out into the darkness. Outside, the first signs of autumn littered the street. Dead leaves crunched beneath my boots. I crossed the road and made my way through the park. Something caught my eye. It was small and silver and shone dimly in the light. I bent down, ran my fingers over it. How the hell had it got here? I hadn't seen a coin in over 10 years, not since the system went totally digital. I shivered, thinking back to the leather purse I used to carry in my left pocket, a time before the days of digital monitoring, a time when you could walk into a bar without having to turn your balance into alcohol credit, where your gym membership didn't count towards your health score, when bank statements weren't checked like passports, a time when I had a job, one that was above board. There were few of us left now. Most had retrained or been sucked into Monitor, the financial monitoring conglomerate. I put the coin into my pocket and squeezed it tight, stepping back onto the street. The wind picked up and I hitched my scarf around my neck, crossing the road. My pager beeped. I pulled it from my pocket. This was the only way me and Akil were able to keep contact without them tracking us. New job, it flashed. Akil, I typed, it's late. New job, keep walking. A shiver ran down my spine. I turned around. The street was empty. I walked faster, damning my heels as they clicked against the concrete. A woman was stood on the corner. She lowered her hood as I approached. The accountant, I take it, she asked. I remained silent. She had straight black hair and olive skin, a mole just above her lip on the right side. A sweet smell drifted from her, like cheap strawberry perfume, the kind you wore at school to impress the boys. Did you get the message? I don't know what you're talking about, I said. She'd intercepted my pager. How? She handed me a credit statement, my credit statement, before the edits I'd performed. My hair stood up as I stared down at my real name. Where did you get this? I asked. She smiled. I'll walk with you to the train tracks. The woman looked me up and down as we walked. I thought you'd be a man, I finished her sentence. Blonde, she corrected me. I ran my hand through my ginger bob. I'd always prided myself in keeping my hair red. Did you like the coin? She asked. Took us a while to find the collector. We thought it'd remind you of the good old times. Who are you? A friend. She offered me a cigarette. I shook my head as she lit her own. You're a difficult person to find, she said. I try and keep myself offline, I admitted. Harder done than said in a world that no longer had paper money. We've got a job for you, the woman continued. We? Me and my employer, she said, taking a drag. We need you to change the credit history of Alva Dam. I took a sharp intake of breath. Dan was one of those candidates running in the elections to lead the Strive Party. A little too Mother Teresa for me, but I could get on board with her. Are you sure? I asked. We're quite sure. The woman threw her bud to the floor. Don't get all charity case on me. You just cleared that pervert's record. My cheeks flushed. How long had they been watching me? That's different, I said. How? The woman asked. I paused. She smiled. There will, of course, be a fee. How much? 60,000 credits. I tried to keep my features neutral. Pretty good for a few minutes' work, she paused. I'll leave it with you. She put a hand on my shoulder before turning and walking back down the street. I leant against the boarded up newsagents and caught my breath. Half a woman's face smiled down at me on the peeling billboard across the road. The old railroad stretched out into the distance. I climbed onto the bridge and walked into darkness away from the metropolis. Alva Dam was a politician, but not a monster. It was difficult to say if she was one of the good guys. I didn't believe in good guys. The woman's words flashed back through my head. You just cleared that pervert's record. My new friend was right, and I hadn't even thought twice about it.
Excellent. Fantastic, Sophie, thank you. I think maybe in the way that Eva killed the ivy trade in the first story by pointing out it's not needed. I'm not sure whether you've either increased the demand to be trained as an accountant or decreased the demand, but it's probably had some effect. Brilliant, and you know, obviously there's a couple of very flippant comments from me there. Whereas Karen, I think you've got probably some more thought through comments than that on those two before we hear the last two.
Yes, Stephen. Yeah, Ava, the summoned, just the first time I had read through this, that the parable of ivy in a league of its own, I think says it all. The 5G latency that's on the horizon for us, there were some real resonant points in there that are not as far away as we think they might be. And I really like the transferable asset content of that, and how that again is resonating with what's going on at the moment. And then there was sort of the truth and fake and what's twisted and how things are spun that's happening right now in narrative, that was really at the core of Ava's story. But that the driving of society to reinforce power, I think, came across in the story of money in the future is kind of what happens underneath money today. But the dynamics that were in that, and a real strength that came through when it came down to the native of that people was the strength. And I think there was a real roundedness. And then of course with Sophie's accountant, the manipulation of means and credit, again going through money, going through history, that although we're looking at the future of money, and social mobility, and employment of what accountants do now and what will happen next, but that corruption of power and the journey of someone's morality in the future and how it's linked to money. You are what you do. And I think just demonstrates that you do what you need, you do what needs to be done. I think Sophie closed her story with that. She just did it because it needed to be done, and question your own morality. I think this series of stories has really been what's in your pocket, but also it's a bigger questioner of the depth of our morality. So yeah, thank you both, Eva and Sophie, for those.
Thanks, Currion. As I thought, but deeper and more thoughtful than my two flippant comments. So that's brilliant. Thank you, Ben. I think you wanted to do another poll before we move on.
Yeah, why not? Let's make sure everybody's still awake back in audience land. So second poll, sort of like broaching the detail around some of this digital central banking stuff now. Who do you think should manage this future money? So we're starting to get a feel for how it might affect some of it. Who on earth should manage this stuff? Should it be states and governments? Do we think it should be independent central banks or financial regulators like the FCA, perhaps? International social media or metaverse companies? So far no score on those. Some new oversight Ofcom agencies, one that we haven't quite figured out yet, but clearly we need. And then obviously the full libertarian option there at the end. Regulation. Free markets can handle this better than anybody else. After all, it is money, but we're there just before things even out. What are we seeing? Very interesting. I wonder if David has anything to say about whether or not an off coin exists or should already, but maybe I have to park that until we've heard two more stories and the insight they might be able to share. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, yeah, brilliant. So our next story is Paul's. Here we go. So Paul, your story is the money talk. So over to you.
Thanks a lot. The money talk. Hey, says Money, why aren't you out there spending? How long do I have left? I ask her. I am sorry to say, says Money, the value of your basic will halve in less than a day. I hate basic, I sigh. Basic is so basic, it's embarrassing to be seen on an exchange with it. Even Money's tone gets sneery when I ask her to spend it. But the longer you leave it, says Money, the less it's worth, and that makes me unhappy. I yearn for a post-money future, I tried several creator gigs, but got swallowed by the long tail every time. Last, I launched an online course on how to develop online courses until the platform changed their conditions so that creators could only pay each other in course credits. Money suggested that I take a guitar course, which I gave up after a month. My parentals will happily keep hiring me from relics, unless a better offer comes in, which is unlikely because I have no gig. My basic is about to halve in value, and I still can't play guitar. After I turn 15, their payments turn optional, but they aren't just rentals. They're also my real parents. We love each other, but love has a price, the ambient suspicion that I'm just not worth it. Let's get some grub, suggests Money, who is everywhere. As I pull my Poundtex jacket on, Money is in the fibers. As I slam the Secure door, Money is in the alarm system. As I stumble to Grub Store, Money is steering us through the dark forest of contracts and counterbids that make up the world. I stole that last line from the post-money manifesto, which was worth every Politicoin I paid for it. Stephanie Zim made so much Politicoin from publishing it that she was able to buy a seat in Parliament. I asked Money to remind me to vote in the nearest quadratic election. I'm running low on Politicoin. I need to get paid. Now, Stephanie Zim gets paid in Westminsters, which may as well be post-money. Good for her, that's what I say. I even have the first line of her manifesto hashed in my money sig. How would I live without the smart shades of money to stop my eyes being gouged by the harsh reality underneath this world? Mostly Money stays in the background until she's needed, and then she becomes my best friend. Are you ready to eat? Asks Money. Grub Store special offer, falafel sandwich. You advertise them for a day, they pay you in falafel. Haggle, I tell Money. Full day is too much. I don't want to get banned from a club tonight just because it's sponsored by one of Grub Store's competitors. Money haggles on my behalf and settles on a half day, and the Grub Store logo shimmers onto my Poundtex sleeve. It's horrible, but I smile at the store clerk as I bite into the falafel sandwich. He smiles back as I break a tooth on something round and rock-like. Lucky me, I've been saving my cursed purse for weeks, so I spend freely, a savage stream of curses that knocks Grub Store's reputation value on several exchanges. The clerk is still smiling for some reason. Out of my mouth, I pull one actual gold coin with a pretty lady's profile on it, and I can't believe it. I'm holding in my hand a Meg. Congratulations, says the clerk. Give me the Meg, says Money. What the fuck, I sputter as a broken tooth comes loose. You've won our lifetime lottery, says the clerk. Establish ownership, shouts Money. But I turn down her volume so I can think. A Meg is post-money. A Meg means value everywhere. A Meg is the KYC jelly that will let me slide into one of the big exchanges, where your word is your currency, where people take you seriously when you tell them you're not interested. Still, I'm not thinking straight. I'll sue you, I tell the clerk, while I instruct Money to put a legal token, any legal token, in escrow to show him I'm serious. You can't sue us, says the clerk, listening to his own money carefully, without voiding the terms of the lifetime lottery. He conspiracies in my direction, but I hold up the falafel sandwich like a gun. Try to take this off me, I tell him, and the cop shop is going to serve you some truncheon on an hourly rate that I decide. I turn Money back up and let her establish ownership of the Meg on chain. I drop the falafel sandwich on the floor and I walk out the door. A bunch of busy bees have heard the news and hum towards me, most already live streaming. Money hearing their exclusive offers, so I don't even have to deal with them. And that's when I realize I don't need their exclusive offers anymore. I have a Meg. I instruct Money to turn down all of those offers. But I'm not even sure I need money anymore. That feeling you get when you stand up too fast after sitting down for too long, that's what this feels like. I sprint home earning fit points every time my trainers hit the pavement. But why should I even care about fit points anymore either? But not even I can run faster than the news, which travels as fast as people will pay it to. My parentals are already waiting outside as I rush up. Doesn't this change everything? I ask them. A life without money. I can't even imagine. Where will her voice in my head go now that I no longer need to truck and barter? It doesn't change the most important thing, my mother replies, as my father smiles proudly and takes my hand. But Relex is already pinging money to ask me if I want to buy out their parental contract. Love and worry, respect and guilt. None of it stored in a ledger. And suddenly I feel more alone than I can stand.
Fantastic, Paul.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Paul. Thank you so much. Very, very enjoyable story. Lots lifted out of that. Lots to come back and round out on. I'm sort of interrupting the introduction of the writers at this stage because our final writer for today is Stephen Oram. Stephen's story, the last in this evening's reads, is called Failing Fathers.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, Failing Fathers. I don't want to beg, but we are best mates and all that. You have to be kidding. They'll trace it so easily, and then where will we be? I shrugged and carried on tinkering with the code of the car that had been brought in to have its latest patches installed. I wasn't paying proper attention to what I was doing, but then if they couldn't pay me a decent wage, why should I? I tried again, speaking loudly, but not directly to him. I have to buy food and heat the house, and it's the wife's birthday. All I want is for you to do some shopping for me. I'll pay you back straight away. I don't see how they'll know it's for me and not you. You've heard the rumours. Anything that smacks of reparation avoidance is swiftly dealt with. Shame laundering, isn't that what they call it? I kept my eyes firmly fixed on the screen in front of me, trying not to make a big deal out of it, even though it was. It's only one weekly food shop. And apart from the illegal bit, your lineage owes my lineage, and until that's done, he had a point, but he was wrong. It wasn't my forefathers who stole stuff from other countries and locked it away in the British Museum. I stared at him. That genetic profiling is crap. Completely ignores the fact that those elite fuckers were stealing from my sort at the same time as robbing the heritage of yours. He mumbled something I couldn't make out. It's too generic. It should be a class thing, not a country thing. No way does it trace those who were really responsible. Another mumble. I looked away. Still, we are where we are, as my mother used to say. For better or worse, we have programmable money and it has rules. He came and stood next to me. You're my friend. I get that. And that's why I know we'll rise above this whole reparation thing. It only lasts until it's all paid back. I nodded, unable to reply. He just didn't get it. Not the sins of my fathers, was all I could mutter under my breath. I was innocent. My whole family line was innocent, and yet my heritage pound was worth less than his because the cost of rebalancing the abuses of other people's ancestors fell to me and mine. I carried on speaking while working. I wasn't asked about the British Museum being privatised. I wasn't consulted about its becoming the asset behind the most widely used private currency. My decision to give it favourable interest rates and lower tax rates than the other currencies. It's those bastards in charge of the Bank of England's digital currency. I rubbed my temples and sighed. I agree with the government offsetting the reparation obligations of its colonial past. But there's a world of difference between agreeing with the what and agreeing with the how. He tutted and went back to his bench. And we ignored each other for the rest of the day, but as he left, he called across. I'll see if the kids have any ideas. My teenage daughter met me outside, determined that I should buy her mother a birthday present. Just a small one, she said. I told her we couldn't afford it and that her mother understood, but she insisted. Why don't we use a different currency? One that works for us, not against us. Then we could afford it, she said. I explained as best I could about how difficult it was to be accepted by any other currency because their rules of interaction with the CBDC were predicated on how risky their customer base was. And we were in one of the highest risk brackets. She pushed hard. Why not do what Sasha's dad does? He owns shares in art that's worth more and more every day. Non-fungible tokens. Get it? Fine for him, I explained, but we don't have the capital to begin with. She huffed and puffed, throwing one superficially thought through solution after another at me. It was as if she considered me to be stupid, as if she thought I'd not explored all these options, in my head at least. She made that disgusting sound with her tongue. It's crap. I know, I said, you're right. It's the very people whose ancestors were responsible for the appalling past of our country who use the other currencies. They escaped any consequences of the national reparation. She was fuming, and with the familiar cry of every teenager, she pointed out that it wasn't fair. All I could do was agree with her, replying with the age-old parental response that life just isn't fair. It was an unsatisfying exchange for both of us. My mate was chatting to me the next day and I was telling him all about it. And despite the seriousness of the situation, I found myself laughing along with him about the idealism of youth. Excuse me. We reminisced about our own teenage years and how we'd been certain that we knew how the world worked and how it could be a lot better. It was good to be back on jovial terms, and he was trying to tell me something his daughter had said, but talking about our kids behind their back was making me feel uncomfortable. I ignored him until he came and stood by me with a big grin on his face. Here, give me your phone, he said, grabbing it from my bench. I frowned, but with curiosity. He swiped the screen and then held his own close to it. There, he said, you'll never guess what. My daughter's been using her Heritage Pound advantage to invest in that new youth currency. Know the one? She's made a mint out of limited edition skins in those games she's fixated with. And, wait for it, she wants to gift your family some shares. With a thumbs up, he added, it's allowed. I was speechless. What a brilliant mate and what a great father.
Thank you, Stephen. That's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Cough midway.
Oh, we can fix that in post, I'm sure. That's fantastic. So what a great set of stories. Everybody coming back on screen now. Lovely. So as a sort of like first impressions of the second group, David, would you like to share with us some initial thoughts as we start to shape up the discussion? And again, would you land on all these AIs negotiating, bartering for you on your behalf? Didn't you write a piece for Forbes on that like 24 hours ago, was it?
I actually don't regard that as that speculative. So I this idea that the sort of decentralizing nature of the technology means we'll end up with lots of currencies rather than like some global currency or some Star Wars galactic credit or something. I'm on board with that. I don't. And one of the reasons why I liked Paul's approach because he brought some emotional values to those different currencies. And one of my crackpot theories about this sort of thing is that the myriad of currencies that we'll see in the future will be somehow connected to the communities that they serve and reflect the values of those communities in some way, which I can't quite put my finger on, but that's why you need in essence art to interpret some of this stuff for you, speaking as a technologist. So I thought it was terrific. I've already tweeted the phrase KYC jelly because I intend to use it relentlessly in every presentation from now on. So that's so yeah, I like that very much. Stephen's was actually was very, and in fact when I read this originally, when we originally discussed it, I mean this as praise. I mean, when we originally discussed these pieces, This is the one that that I was thinking about the most afterwards, because I think Stephen, you do raise some really very you throw light on some really interesting issues, but in a way that makes them thoughtful rather than polemic, and I really like that. One thing I would say is that the reason why I sort of liked I mean, forgetting the stuff that you're talking about there, was there's a resonance between this idea of taking the treasures of the British Museum, or the loot as we call it, and instead of giving it back, turning it into a currency. It's very students of history will recognize in this just to pander to Eva's revolutionary pretensions. This is what happened in the French Revolution. So after the French Revolution, they took the land of the church, the monasteries, and turned it into a currency, the assignats, that were supposedly backed by the treasures of this church land. But of course weren't really, and so collapsed in hyperinflation. But so your story, I think, actually has resonances in actual monetary histories, which I rather like, because I'm a nerd about that sort of thing. So I thought they were both stories that that really make you think, that show things that I don't regard as fanciful. I regard as sort of technologically, on the curve, but made me think about them in a different way, which I really appreciate. So thanks very much, guys.
That's fantastic, David. Thank you very much for that. So there's a couple of different directions that I'd like to take the conversation. One you've sort of teased out there, which is how much of this is fantasy, or how much of this are we engaging with practical use cases for money that are very, very near future. And I'd like you all, I know you all participate in that, Jana and Caroline as well, with the NFT project you've been on. So I'm sure we'll try to float around that at some point. But equally, one that's come up, as also I've seen coming up in the chat, is the issue of trust. I think that, in a sense, actually unifies sort of almost both halves. It's like trust that the money can serve our community, something we've heard a lot about, not just digital currencies, but complementary currencies more broadly. And I think trust in the first half of the night, as we're saying, is this a technology, an enabling technology where it's free for all, or is it just chaos and a free for all? Lots of threads to pull, but Jana, since you've been sitting there surveying the stories as they've come through again, how much of your opening pitch did we land in or miss? Or
yeah, I mean, I thought it was really important to obviously introduce the concept of Bitcoin, because that's taking the opposing view to obviously the financial world that we live in, the world that we exist in. And I think what's really interesting, I think, about the majority of the stories is that we're very concerned about this kind of, the dystopia potentially that might happen, and this is coming from a place of complete uncertainty and concern that actually, whilst we're trying to build this alternative financial system, which is all about being open, being transparent, creating trust, because you have smart contracts. You don't need an intermediary to decide what goes in, what goes out. Are we likely to, is it likely to coexist? Are we likely to sort of get away with it if we have the governments around the world who are increasingly concerned, and we know that they do not want to lose control. I don't know if you heard the conversation by Christine Lagarde recently from the ECB. I mean, there's no doubt that they do not like Bitcoin. They're going to use Ethereum to build out something that suits them, but we know that it's a broken system.
Okay, that's interesting. There was one of the lines that I tried to pull out of the previous Governor of the Bank of England's piece on this, was his view of central banks being what did he call it? The curator of money, and the idea being that there's a variety of monies out there, and central banks just curating. I know that's not quite grabbing what makes a nationally backed bank a thing, but I think it does tease out this idea that we'll have multiple digital complementary currencies. there's a lots of different monies. I think that's what we're thinking here. We might well be, is that on the believable scale? So that lots and lots of different types of money running side by side. Are we going to believe this is going to happen or not, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is where DeFi, makes a lot of sense. I think we're essentially, as I said, we're building a new financial system. It's happening right now. The one that we've got doesn't work. We're going to be slowly migrating, I think, rather than it being a big bang or a big collapse. How that plays out with CBDCs, I guess we'll wait and see. Yes, there is a concern that we'll be so controlled by what they're doing that people will do everything they can to live within the DeFi, the other networks, the other currencies, if you like.
Okay, thank you. Currion, I know your project on the NFTs with actors has a potential for being a currency serving its community, or maybe less a currency, more an investment hedge?
It's the idea of taking things that are, especially in the live performance world, very ephemeral. So you've got programs and tickets and things that are paper, and that there's no record of once something's happened. And NFTs and the blockchain smart contract world that is starting to emerge is a really interesting world of being able to give value to something that is fleeting, and whether that's a selection of assets minted on a blockchain, or it's, as in Eva's story, the idea of starting to have assets that are transferable amongst networks. What's going to rise to the top? So the NFT concepts that I'm looking at is not just the minting of them. That can be done now without, there's lots of different ones to choose from. But the question is, how do the public start to be able to engage with that world? And one of the things from a performance point of view, or especially a point of view of creatives, is even as the digital world started to emerge, that most performers are, the better they are at their job, the less time they have spent in a world where they've had to engage with desktop technology. So most creatives who work in the entertainment industry, their experience of the internet tends to be from a mobile phone perspective. So to ask them to be given an NFT coin, what would you do with it? The idea of being able to take these assets that a performance creates. I mean, the one thing that the entertainment industry doesn't have is the lack of content. It's often, how do you document it fast enough before the next thing happens? And the notion of somehow being able to block that on a chain, so that, for example, if you took part in a performance and as part of it you got paid, but you also had as part of that a token. Right now, it may not be worth anything, but in 5 years' time, when your career has evolved and you've grown as a performer, somebody may say to you, weren't you in that show that was in Edinburgh in 2021? And then, yeah, and they're like, I'd really like to own that. And all of a sudden, everyone who had one of those tokens could decide to sell it or put it up for sale. And the thing I love about what I'm finding out about NFTs is the commissioning behind it, that if you have something that belongs to the original owner, if it gets sold, that permission, that percentage goes back. And I've just been really interested in exploring that, and the Arts Council are supporting me in sort of going down that rabbit hole. So I'm really enjoying just uncovering all of that stuff. There's a lot of future to it, along existing models, because we currently have in the entertainment industry residuals and syndications for television and film. And I'm just really looking forward to a royalties and syndication smart contract model that can maybe exist for that in the live performance world.
Right, that's quite interesting. A lot of the conversation I hear around NFT, and NFT will be very, very significant this year, is actually a preservation of existing mechanics, so current sort of tools for ownership and recognition of ownership. that in themselves, whether they're revolutionary or not, I'm not sure I can decide on yet, but certainly the narrative is around who has access to participation. David, I know you and I have spoken about how none of this is that new, and yet lots of it is very different. Smart contracts sound great when they're both smart and contracty, but perhaps they're neither. Is it still just lumps of capital? Are we just encoding them differently?
Well, I mean, smart contracts have taken on a sort of, they've taken on a sort of quasi-religious
fool's gold, should we say?
So in people in a previous kind of, in a previous cycle of life, we would have ascribed, you know, these powers to fairies or demons or something, but it's become smart contracts, have become the sort of mythical utopian mechanism for ensuring fairness, which, but they're just apps, and not very good ones at that. And Vitalik Buterin, who was the genius who invented Ethereum, is on record as saying he wishes he'd never called them smart contracts. He should have called them something like persistent scripts, because it's very misleading. But I must admit, they do add to the gaiety of the nation. There's a fantastic court case going on at the moment in one of the South Korean blockchains where a chap is being, they've taken him to court to freeze millions of dollars, $200 million, I think, which he supposedly stole from a smart contract. And he says, quite justifiably in my mind, well, I didn't steal it. There was a bug in your code. I just used the code that you put up in the smart contract. Mm-hmm. And the result, and I used it in a clever way. And the result of that was that I ended up $200 million up. So basically, you can't have it both ways. Either code is law or it isn't, you know. And I don't like that almost teenage pseudo-libertarian code is law thing. It sounds good in the mom can't stop me from buying a PlayStation kind of view of the economy, but I don't think that's really what we want. So I'm very skeptical about. Having said that, I'm not skeptical about NFTs at all, because I think NFTs are actually, but right now, I think, you know, the most interesting aspect of the whole sort of cryptocurrency revolution. And the reason for that is because NFTs make the virtual world more like the real world, in the sense that, so let's, I'll use Star Trek. Everybody understands Star Trek, right? Or Doctor Who. So in Star Trek, anything you wanted to copy, you could put it through the replicator. Remember, in Star Trek, you had, Star Trek is a hippie, I mean, it's nonsensical hippie rubbish, but it's hippie post-scarcity economics. That's the foundation of Star Trek. You could replicate anything you wanted. But there was one thing that you couldn't replicate. There's one thing that didn't go through the replicators, which was
gold-pressed latinum, right?
It was gold-pressed latinum. The one thing you couldn't put through the replicators was gold-pressed platinum. And so that was what the Ferengi used as money. The one thing that you couldn't copy was the thing that they used as money. So if you put to one side the thinly veiled anti-Semitic tropes around the Ferengi, the idea that the valuable thing is the thing that you can't copy is true. That's the heart of that. So the idea that you can make tokens that can't be copied, you know, if I send Sophie a Bitcoin, I'm not sending her a copy of the Bitcoin. It's now her Bitcoin, not mine. If I send Sophie a picture of my cat, it's a copy. I've still got the picture of the cat. She's got a copy of the picture of the cat. That's not like the real world. If I send her a Bitcoin, now it's her Bitcoin, it's not my Bitcoin. That's like the real world. So tokens, I think, are in economic terms, I think tokens are the revolution. Just one very quick point. I know I bore everybody senseless about this sort of thing, but when you're talking about like art and the future and whatever, I think generally speaking, I think I'm an out there, you know, go ahead thinker, right? By and large, we're too conservative. So if we'd have been having this competition in, for example, 1621, about the future of money, we'd all have been moaning about the poor quality of the silver coinage in circulation. and coming up with clever ways to improve silver coinage. And one of you would have been writing about, well, what if we milled the edges of the coins? And we'd all be laughing at you saying that. Whatever. And somebody would say, well, what if we produced the coins with a steam press instead of manually? That would never happen. None of us would have predicted the invention of the Bank of England or Sir Isaac Newton putting us on a proto-gold standard, or paper circulating as a medium of exchange. None of us would have, I think anyway, none of us would have predicted what actually happened. So I just, as a caution, like, these guys are forcing us to think, and I like it. I like being forced to think more. But even they, I think, are probably being too conservative, because the radical shifts in money are much more radical than we're thinking about.
But they are radical in the wrong way. I think I love what you're saying, but I think we are conservative in the wrong way, if there is such a thing.
What do you mean?
That we are faffing about, granularization of money, and I'm very interested in that, particularly if it's cities money involved. I think that is the right direction. But we're not rethinking about the control of money. So I've been busy reading this book that I think you mentioned a few times about the history of Bank of England.
I have it right here, so that's
right, and it's quite riveting how we live in the world constructed quite a few centuries ago, and nobody really is taking a hack at that, how to rethink the assetization of everything. The reason why in US the top 1% owns more than 60% of middle class, because majority of large landlords and land owners are people who landed on these boats back in the day. And you still go to New York in the summer, and you still meet the same people, cabbots and people who were hanging around, families after family, generation after generation, and they have protected their word so strongly that nobody really can touch it anymore. And it's the same in Europe in a slightly less visible way, because we're a bit quieter about it. But I'm fascinated with it because I'm Polish, and Poland was the most equal egalitarian society when the communists finished off with us, i.e. nobody had anything, so we were equally poor. But within one generation, we are the most unequal, which is why we have real political problems. So it took about 20 years for the early people to grab what they could and leave very little for the rest. So you can see the human nature being what it is, uncontrolled, and it's uncontrollable at the moment. It really has this whole notion of wastefulness, like the first grabs what they can and let's put a moat around it. But we're missing so much in innovation and so much energy from everybody else if you don't have role models that come from the other side of the tracks. And I know that is only 20 years where certain people ended up owning everything. So it happens so quickly when you let it rip. And I think that is the conservative approach that we're kind of missing, that we have to unpack it somehow and start going really radical about, we don't want to live in the world constructed 300 years ago. So I think this is more political than technical money issue. I think we need to look further.
I've had a take this year, certainly with the NFT stuff, on a parallel to how it felt when the World Wide Web first sort of made itself accessible and usable. And whilst, it did a very creative spurt, and then nobody used it for a bit, and then marketing companies and big industry turned up and said, oh, we know how to make money out of this stuff, let us run it. In those first few years, the idea that, the mechanics to build sites and the mechanics to assemble companies or start things, there wasn't, I won't call it egalitarian, but the barrier to entry was nil, right? And if an NFT technology isn't allowing me to become a member of an investment class with a low barrier to entry, to identify a new asset, to create it and consolidate it in a way that previously only either a rare metal or a rare painting could do it, is that not a barrier to entry lessener? Is that going to help?
That's not, I don't think that's Eva's point, if I've understood it properly. So if you use the Bitcoin example as a radical new technology that we never had before, a genuine breakthrough in technology, the ability to form distributed consensus where the economic model was aligned with the consensus forming process. That was a genuinely new thing. We never had that before. That's like the ships landing in the new world, and exactly the same thing happened. So most of the Bitcoins are controlled by I don't know what, a couple of hundred people maximum, something like that. The whales that it has, it's far more unequal than the world we have now. So to Eva's point, you need some kind of political action to make that happen.
Just to pick up on Eva's point, and I absolutely adore Eva's story, and I know I said that last time we all got together, because it's a wonderful reflection of the world that we live in, and the fact that there is a very small part of our society who have historically and continue to have access to most of the capital, and therefore continue to generate most wealth. And we live in a very unequal world. And however, we have the opportunity now more than ever to redistribute wealth, and we need to give the 99% of the population around the world the ability to innovate, to share their views, to leave their stamp on the world. It's a very difficult thing to do. We do need the government, ironically, to help, but we also need these decentralized systems like blockchain, the metaverse. All of these new worlds, I guess, will allow people to have much closer access and hopefully to be able to reap the rewards by generating wealth for themselves in a way that's just not been possible before. And I think Eva's story is very optimistic, and ultimately it's about the freedom to build your own life using technology in this whole new world that we're building, which is extremely empowering.
I mean, we might not be sitting on the revolutionary toolkit here and tonight, but it sounds like we are looking for a change to these systems. Whether or not this teases out sufficient change, maybe we'll only know in time. It's funny you should land on that issue. This wasn't rehearsed ahead of time, but I did have a poll almost exactly on that question, which I'm going to run now as we do. So one more question on digital money. What do we think as an audience? What do we expect to change most due to the arrival of digital money? Are we looking at increased liquidity and activity, but much the same world and much the same financial systems as we have now? Is it a new boom time for marginalized, creative or exploited workforces? Because this is a new toolkit. Is this a new boom time only for financial services? Or are we likely to see a creation of a whole new class of have-nots, digitally disappeared, we've never seen before? Or, as it looks like we're all sitting either cynical or, or more of the same. No real change and an acceleration of the division between rich and poor. See, that would suggest that we haven't found the revolutionary toolkit in our financial systems, but we are looking at something new. Okay, thanks very much for that. Let's share those results. Yeah, a whole new class of haves, have-nots looks to be, if not likely, then certainly at risk. Sophie, you've certainly got a conversation about accountants. Does our accountant have or have not at this point? Does she have when she has a coin? She feels like she regretted the career path she landed herself in. I think she's a new one of the digitally disappeared. Or did she opt for that life, do you think?
I don't know. I guess it's all a choice. I suppose my story is more about morality, and when people say those things like, oh, I'm just doing my job, and what that actually means, I guess. Someone did put in the chat earlier, though, I think we'll always need accountants, though, whether it's like credits or we're counting beans or NFTs or whatever it is. So I thought that was a really important point. So I don't know.
Yeah, when we were in the private panel, when we were discussing that thing, I think we identified that it's ledger keepers who would be completely wiped out. The classic AI took my job will be one class of financial services, but not necessarily all of them. I kind of want to grab Paul as well. So the other side of the accountant in your story, Paul, is money. It has absorbed itself into its own narrative. It's become its own AI, and it's running the show. Is that our revolution? Is that going to change?
I mean, like Dave says, that's not really speculative. I mean, that is what is going to happen. In the story, money is just anthropomorphized. Whereas I think, Dave made the point previously that it's more likely to be running in the background. But every AI will need an interface. So the interface in my story is the money persona. But I think the key thing in the story is there are all these multiple currencies for everything that you might be doing during the day, whether that's swearing, running, or, you know, having a relationship with your parents. But what I found, what I didn't explore was whether those would be interchangeable. But I think what you get in that kind of multiple currency situation is the type of currency you hold determines whether you're one of the haves or have-nots, not how much of a currency you hold. Because if I have, what was it, curse purse, you know, I can swear as much as I want with no social penalties. Well, that's great, but that doesn't really make me one of the haves in any meaningful sense. So I think I was more interested in that types of currency might define, you know, how well off people are, rather than the amount of currency that they hold. 1 meg takes you into another world entirely.
Right. Well, one thing I found between all of the stories really is, again, we have a different financial system, we have a different economic system, we still have pretty much the same humans in the middle of it. I know there's a class of fantastical humans in your story, Eva, but everywhere else we've still got swearing, eating, thinking, panicking, people with issues with their parents, as much as we've got, you know, the morality of those people at question, and, you know, the pride or fears of those people at issue, Stephen, in your story. However our money changes, we'll probably still be in the middle of all of them. I'm going to want to do a bit of a wrap up here. There's a few questions that are coming up in the chat, some technical, some with some address, but certainly all worth talking about. I mean, timeline, I hadn't noticed this either, but Vaughan raises it, and Jana, you mentioned it in your original pitch. Sakamura's paper on Bitcoin and the launch being, you know, the same year as the 2008 crash. I think we've got a question here. Does the panel and the authors think that the acceptance and adoption of these digital currencies came about because of it, or will come about because of a new 2008-like crash in the old money? Is that a spike and a push that's going to do it? Because the new offer is so compelling that enough ordinary people can't resist it. David, care to come in on that one?
I tend to, I'd vote for the latter if given that simple choice, but I guess my thinking on it would be to go back to the book that Eva was waving around earlier on, which is, you know, it's not obvious any of these things are actually sort of planned or organized. This is why I don't completely hold with the sort of conspiracy theory view of history. I mean, most things are so the Bank of England was, to use Ava's example, the Bank of England was not created to create a stable circulating medium of exchange. It was created to fund a war against France. And a happy byproduct of this was that the paper notes became used as, I mean, nobody sat down and said, well, what if we had paper money and we'd circulate that? And then, you roll on another 50 or so years and there's no circulating money in the country, because we've moved from being a rural to an industrial society. People need money wages, but there are no coins in circulation to use to pay people money. I think the smallest banknote, which was then the £5 note, was like, I don't know, whatever it was, a year's wages or something. So then you had companies in Birmingham who had experience in printing, making metal buttons and medals and things like that, started making their own coins, which people liked, and they started to use these copper coins. And then 50 years later on, the Royal, and then you have this thing economists call the big problem of small change, because the marginal cost of production of those things becomes the price and nobody can make a living, but we still need the copper coin. So then the Royal Mint has to stay. The Royal Mint didn't have a plan for making copper coins to, so I sort of wonder, in answer to that question, if it's actually going to be something much more accidental. So it will be, if I was trying to write speculative fiction, and my answer will demonstrate why I don't, I might say, well, it'd be, if I was going to look, I'd look on the margins. It'll be something like, what happens if OnlyFans make their own money that's uncensorable for payouts, because they're fed up with Visa and MasterCard blocking their payouts, and it just happens to be a very useful form of money, so lots of people end up using it. And then you have this sort of adult money that children aren't allowed to use, but that's okay, we use it for all these things. But you might not want to use it in polite society, so then you have to change your porno money through money laundering processes to turn it into driving your mother to church on Sunday money, which you use every, it's going to be something like that. It's not going to be people sitting down and designing this fabulous new money world of the future.
That's really quite a nice parallel into Sophie's story there, actually. So your accountant's got a job already. It's changing your porno money into your Sunday going to church money.
But actually, that's one of the great things about Sophie's story was this point about it's like the superhero movie of the future. You know, the people it's like the accountant who becomes the key person in the story, and I like that. It's very imaginative, you know.
Pricing of coins, it seems like a really interesting thing. Is there a way to handle a pricing of a stable coin asset rather than to peg it to a fiat currency? You know, do we have any idea what happens to coins? Are they more resilient or less resilient to extreme inflation or deflation? You know, we've found maybe that's the fear moment, the scare moment when we end up diving into these things more. More likely, less likely? It would feel from the stories tonight, let's say then, that what it anchors money to anything at all is us and how we use it. You know, I mean, I can't imagine anybody actually goes out to use a currency to hyperinflate it.
Yeah, can I just
what causes
I just want to, oh, sorry, Eva, after you.
Yeah, just a quick one. So, you know, I'm more of a system thinker rather than financier, but to my mind, looking at what's going on at the moment, the current inflation is a logistics inflation. It's a supply chain and demand mismatch. And it probably has got very little to do with money in a technical sense. It's got everything to do with boats stuck in port sense, and the fact that we have 1.5 year lag in production. So I think there are different kinds of inflations, and there are probably very different kinds of hyperinflations, which I'm sure somebody has made, you know, probably Richard knows about the table of different types. But I think the one we've got now, I am actually with Christine Lagarde on that it's a temporary demand mismatch with supply chain blockage inflation. But, you know, I might be wrong.
Justin's just commented in the chat here saying that, you know, the stability isn't so much what drives humans because we're reactionary. How could anything be stable in a world that's got us in it? I think I feel a lot of affinity with that kind of line. Eva, I know you'd mentioned a few guests who've been joining us tonight who might want to promote in the chat and raise those questions. I think now might be a good time if any of them do. On a closing notes here in the last few minutes, I know trust has come up a bunch of times. The trust and morality as much as liquidity and riches. We've got one final poll that I'd like to run just to see how participant we might all be in these upcoming future monies. So the end of show question here: have you now, or do you ever expect to be, and minting tokens, mining coins, or programming money? So what are we looking at? I have and I do. Fiat has always been my second choice. I have and I do, but only for special purposes. Not sure that necessarily means illegal, but you can assume it does. I expect I will, but only to invest when the products and services I want require me to. So it's kind of like forced through the system. I won't personally, but I expect my business will. I don't and I won't until I have to, and I haven't, but it's the future, so I'm in. Where are we all sort of landing after tonight's conversation?
I think there's one. If I was going to be annoying, I would say, if I was going to be more annoying, I should say, there would be sort of one factor that I think hasn't really wandered across the conversation yet, which is that, remember, most financial transactions in the future won't really involve people. So in the you know, in a generation or so, when you walk down the shops to buy something, the actual transaction itself will be between an AI that you're connected to in some way and an AI that the shop is connected to in some way. It won't really between. So actually, you probably won't even know which currencies are being used in the transaction. You know, you look in Waitrose. Waitrose will display the prices to me in Sussex dollars, and it'll display the prices to Eva in Stoke Newington pounds, or whatever it is, or barrels of oil or gold, or whatever it is she is comfortable assessing. And when you press the button to buy, the actual exchange of whichever basket of commodities or currencies or whatever goes on in the background probably won't be visible to us because it will be negotiated in nanoseconds between AIs. So I think one sort of thing that I do talk to people about in the wholesale, not yet in the retail context, is the idea that actually we're looking at much more complex financial instruments because they're not any longer designed for people to trade with other people. So the purpose of the sort of risk minimization which is what the financial system is supposed to do, will allow these vastly more complex instruments to be traded that we won't really understand anymore. So that might be one factor that, again, I'm thinking about it too technologically, but that might be one factor I would feed into a next generation of stories.
Wonderful. In fact, then we will. AI, unsurprisingly, or rather maybe not unsurprisingly, didn't actually feature as a topic in its own right in our first series of Tales Nights, but it got touched on pretty much each time. I can imagine, certainly in terms of the what an interface or what the human interface to these AI engines behind the scenes will actually look like. That came up a few times. It came up in the high street stories, it came up in the health stories. In a sense, it's coming up again here. You've set us up well for season 2 next year, David. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we probably do a quick wrap up, and then we stop recording, move to a post-recording conversation. So just to say a big thank you to everybody, particularly for the panelists who had to do a lot of reading, and the writers who spent a lot of time getting the stories better. I think we are ready for the new world of more emotional money, not necessarily smarter, but emotional. New world of being less conservative and more radical, and also being very aware of heritage money, what history we're bringing to settlements from the past, because I think that's a very, very strong topic. And obviously sex, crime, and accountants is going to be my evergreen favorite topic. So thank you, Sophie, for bringing that to our attention. So thank you very much. This is the end of the formal part, and we'll see you separately in a minute. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.